There is a rule in the galaxy so old that most species stopped questioning it the way you stop questioning gravity. Humans are soft. No extra limbs. No armored skin. No venom glands, no echolocation, no magnetic field sensors woven into their nervous system. They bleed from paper cuts. Their bones snap under pressures that a Crefchild survives laughing. Their average lifespan, by galactic standards, is embarrassingly short, barely enough time to learn the right dialects and offend the right people. Every species with faster-than-light travel had assessed humanity the same way: interesting, creative, emotionally chaotic, biologically fragile. A curiosity. Not a threat. The Galactic Compact had allowed humans into its outer commerce rings as a courtesy. A little charity for the new species still fumbling with jump drives. They were given trade routes nobody else wanted, station posts in sectors too boring or too dangerous for anyone with better options. They were tolerated the way you tolerate a stray dog that keeps showing up at your door, mostly harmless, occasionally useful, easy to ignore. That was the consensus. Then, a human pulled a dying Veil warrior out of wreckage that 17 other species had already written off as unrecoverable. He didn't do it because he was ordered to. He didn't do it for a reward. He didn't calculate survival odds or request a risk assessment form from his station commander. He just went in. And, that one moment, that single, stupid, biologically irrational act of a soft-bodied primate crawling into burning debris for a stranger from a species that had never once shown humans a shred of respect, cracked something open in the structure of the galaxy. Because the warrior girl he saved was not just any Veil. And, the galaxy was about to find out exactly what humans do when someone they care about is in danger. Spoiler, it isn't what anyone expected. It never is. The distress beacon had been pinging for 11 minutes before Marcus Vale heard it on the secondary comm channel. Secondary, because that was where nobody listened. Primary was for official compact traffic, clean, regulated, logged. Secondary was for the noise, minor complaints, cargo disputes, the occasional drunk freighter pilot singing in Creth dialect at 2 a.m. Marcus had wired his personal comm unit to pick up secondary because 11 months stationed at Outer Relay Post 7 had taught him that the interesting things always came through on the wrong channel. The beacon was not singing in Creth dialect. It was a distress code. Old format. Military grade. The kind that got filed under emergency protocols and, then, ignored when the ship in distress flew Veil colors, because the Compact's emergency response teams were staffed by species that had complicated histories with Veil warrior clans, histories involving words like invasion, territorial annexation, and that one solar system that nobody on the council liked to bring up at formal dinners. Marcus pulled the signal coordinates. Sector 7G, half a kilometer off the post's eastern docking arm. He checked the emergency dispatch board. It was blank. No response teams assigned. The autolog showed the signal had been received, catalogued, and deprioritized. Deprioritized was a diplomatic word. It meant nobody was going. He sat with that for about 4 seconds. Then, he grabbed his emergency kit, his suit patch tape, a portable oxygen line, and his lunch, because he'd learned early in life that you never went into a crisis hungry, and he went. The wreckage was a Veil scout vessel, and it had not landed so much as introduced itself violently to the docking arm's support strut. The hull was split along the port side. Something had hit it, something with a targeting system, because the damage pattern was not an accident. Someone had shot this ship. Shot it, watched it limp into the outer relay's gravity range, and then, apparently left, satisfied with the result. The outer hull was hot. Not burning fire hot, but reactor leaking hot, which Marcus understood was arguably worse. He pulled his suit's radiation filter up, checked it, patched the hairline crack along the left elbow seal with the tape he really needed to requisition a new suit, and climbed in through the split in the hull. Inside was dark, tilted, full of smoke that the ship's circulation system was too damaged to vent. Emergency lighting had kicked on in one section. Red. Everything red. The smell was something between burning wire and something biological he didn't have a name for yet. He found her in the cockpit. She was upright, barely. One arm had locked itself into the pilot restraint harness in what looked like a deliberate grip, like she'd used the last of her conscious strength to keep herself from sliding forward into the cracked viewport. 4 feet tall, maybe 4'2", which was short even for Vale, with the dense gray-blue plating along her shoulders and arms that all Vale warriors carried. Natural armor, keratin composite, grew in during adolescence like permanent body armor you couldn't take off. Her head was bare, which meant the helmet was gone, which meant she'd taken the initial impact without it. Her crest, the articulated ridge of sensory spines that ran down a Vale skull, was half collapsed. One side had snapped. That was bad. Marcus didn't know much about Vale anatomy, but he knew that the crest was sensory and vascular. Something that size snapping meant blood loss from somewhere he couldn't see. She was breathing. Barely. He did the math in his head: radiation exposure, blood loss, no response teams coming, reactor temperature climbing. He had, generously, 20 minutes before the reactor crossed into unstable territory and another 8 after that before the window to get her out closed permanently. He unclipped the restraint harness, which fought him because it had partially fused in the impact, and he worked at it with the small multi-tool on his kit belt and the kind of focused patience that his old station supervisor had once called terrifying. Not the panicked, frantic patience of someone running out of time. The calm, granular attention of someone who understood that rushing a fused harness clip only stripped the release mechanism, and a stripped release mechanism meant nobody got out. The clip released. She dropped forward. He caught her. She was heavier than she looked. Warrior plating had density to it, and she'd probably massed as much as he did despite being nearly a foot shorter, and he staggered, found his footing, and got his arm under her shoulder. She made a sound. Not words. A Vale sound, a low, clicking resonance from somewhere in her chest that his translator chip read as threat response. His translator chip, being a cheap post-issue model, added a helpful notation: warning, subject may be aggressive. Yeah, Marcus said to nobody, I got that. He moved. Getting out was harder than getting in, because now he was carrying most of her weight across a tilted floor covered in debris from the overhead compartment, with smoke thickening and the reactor making a sound that he felt in his back teeth more than heard. She was barely conscious. Twice she grabbed at the hull. Instinct, warrior instinct, the grab and hold reflex of a fighter who'd woken up and couldn't process where she was yet, and both times he stopped moving, let her grip whatever she was gripping, spoke to her in the most neutral, non-threatening tone he owned, and waited for the grip to slacken before moving again. I've got you. We're moving. You're going to be fine. His translator chip did not have Vale military dialect, so the words probably came out as mush on her end. But tone apparently traveled across species lines, because she stopped fighting him after the second grab. They came out through the hull split 8 minutes before his reactor estimate expired. He got her 30 meters clear before he sat down on the docking arm's metal floor and let himself breathe for a moment. She was looking at him. Vale eyes were solid black, no visible iris, no white, just depth, like looking at something that looked back from a long way inside. They were focused. She was conscious. She was assessing him with the undivided attention of someone who had, in all probability, never once in her life had to be carried to safety by anything, let alone a human. Marcus raised one hand in what he hoped was a universal gesture of non-aggression. I'm Marcus. I work at the post. Nobody was coming for you, so? She stared at him. Her damaged crest made a small, involuntary movement, a flinch, he thought, though it might have been pain. Then, she said something. One word. Clipped, low, her translator chip, which was military grade and, thus considerably better than his, rendering it cleanly into standard. Why? Not thank you. Not who are you. Not where am I. Why? Marcus thought about that for a second. Because you needed help, he said. She kept staring. The expression on a Vale face was always difficult to read, the plate structure around their jaw and cheekbones flattened what humans used as the primary emotional surface, but something moved in those black eyes. Something he couldn't name and didn't try to. That's not a reason, she said. It is where I come from. The reactor let out a long, shuddering groan behind them. Something deep in the ship's core gave. The hull listed another 3 degrees to port. A panel Marcus hadn't noticed separated from the ship's belly and fell past them into the docking arm's lower void, spinning, shrinking, gone. He watched it go. Then, he looked back at her. Can you walk? We should probably be further away from that. She looked at the ship. She looked at her own arm, where the warrior plating was cracked along the forearm, a crack that hadn't been visible in the dark, and a thin, dark fluid was moving beneath it. She looked at him. No, she said. Not yet. Okay. He sat down properly, cross-legged, on the metal floor. Opened his kit. Found the nutrient pack he'd grabbed alongside the oxygen line and the tape. It was a human formulation, no idea if it was safe for Vale physiology, so he held it up and showed it to her rather than handing it over. This probably won't kill you. Probably. I don't actually know your metabolic restrictions. She looked at the pack. Then, at him. The crest, the undamaged half of it, shifted. Not the threat movement from before. Something else. You don't know Vale biochemistry and you brought nutrition supplies anyway. I was optimistic. She was quiet for a moment. Then, very carefully, she lowered herself to the floor, not quite sitting, more of a controlled fold, one knee down, the armored weight of her settling with precision, and she took the pack from his hand. He found out later that her name was Sarah Vac. That she was the third daughter of warlord Davin Vac of the Northern Reach clan, which meant she was, functionally, galactic royalty in a culture that defined royalty entirely through combat lineage and blood ode. He found out later that the ship that had shot her down belonged to the Marin Syndicate, a weapons trafficking operation that had spent 3 years trying to eliminate anyone connected to the Vale clans who were actively disrupting their supply lines, and Sarah Vac had, in the month before she was shot down, disrupted 4 of them personally. He found out later that 17 compact species had received the distress signal and chosen not to respond, and that the record of that choice was automatically logged into the compact's emergency response archive, where it would sit, quietly, until someone decided to look at it. He found out all of this later. Right now, he sat on a metal floor next to a battered alien warrior who was consuming a human nutrient pack with the focused intensity of someone who refused to show how badly they needed it, and the reactor behind them groaned and settled, and the red emergency lights of the ruined cockpit threw long shadows across the docking arm, and nobody spoke. It was fine. He had 11 months of practice at sitting with silence. When the post's medical team finally arrived 23 minutes after he'd sent his own emergency notification through primary channels, where the right people actually listened, they found him sitting exactly where he'd settled, kit open, monitoring her vitals on the basic scanner he'd had the presence of mind to clip to her wrist at some point, explaining in the measured tones of someone who had clearly already had this argument with himself and resolved it, that he was not leaving until the medical team had eyes on her, and that no, he didn't need to be checked out, he was fine, and yes, he understood the radiation exposure guidelines, and no, he was not moving. The medic, a three-eyed Serati with the expression of someone who had seen everything and was still somehow surprised, looked at the human sitting cross-legged on the floor next to an unconscious Vale warrior, looked at the crack suit, looked at the still-leaking wrecked ship, and said nothing for a long moment. Then, she said, "You went in there alone." "Nobody else was going," Marcus said. "She's Vale." "I noticed." The Serati medic looked at her scanner. Then, at him. Then, in a voice that carried something unreadable in it, she said, "Do you know who she is?" Marcus looked at Sarah Vac. At the cracked crest. At the dark fluid drying along the cracked forearm plating. At the empty nutrient pack she was still holding in one unconscious grip. "She needed help," he said. "That's enough for me." The medic filed her report 3 hours later. She classified the incident under unsanctioned emergency response solo, which was a category that technically existed but had never been used in the post's 11-year operational history, because the implicit understanding at outer relay posts was that you did not go into a reactor-leaking wreck alone for someone whose species had a complicated reputation, no matter what the secondary comm channel said. The post commander called Marcus into his office the following morning and delivered a formal reprimand for violating safety protocol, unauthorized deployment of post equipment, and what the commander referred to, with visible discomfort, as radical unsolicited intervention in an active deprioritized incident. Marcus accepted the reprimand. signed the form, thanked the commander for his time, walked out. At the med bay, behind a sealed door, Saravac opened her eyes in the dark and lay still, and thought about a word she had said, and the answer she had received, and the way a human with a crack suit and someone else's nutrient pack had sat on a metal floor next to her like it was the only place in the galaxy he needed to be. She had fought for 17 years. She had bled on 6 different worlds. She had watched warriors twice her size and 3 times her experience calculate odds before committing to action. He had not calculated. He had just gone in. She thought about that for a long time. Word traveled fast in the compact, but gossip traveled faster, and the story of a human crawling solo into a reactor-leaking Veil wreck moved through Outer Relay Post 7's social ecosystem the way fire moves through dry grass, not because anyone thought it was particularly important, but because it was strange, and strange things were the only real currency at a post where nothing notable had happened in 11 months. By the second day, the story had already acquired several improvements it hadn't started with. By the third day, the version circulating among the Kreth maintenance crew had Marcus fighting off 3 syndicate operatives with a multi-tool. By the fourth day, a Serati trader who'd been docked for fuel had picked it up and carried it out on the primary shipping lane heading toward the inner compact rings, where it would mutate further and land in places Marcus couldn't have anticipated. Marcus was aware of none of this. He was doing his job, which at Outer Relay Post 7 involved monitoring secondary comm traffic, filing cargo declarations, and arguing with the post's supply requisition system about his suit replacement, which the system kept classifying as a discretionary upgrade rather than necessary maintenance, despite the fact that his elbow seal currently held together via patch tape that was now on its second day of doing the structural work of a seal that cost 40 credits. He also went to the med bay every morning before his shift and every evening after it. He didn't announce himself. He didn't bring anything elaborate. He would check in with the medic on duty. The rotation included the 3-eyed Serati, 2 humans, and a Kreth with medical credentials he respected enormously, get a status update, and if Saravac was conscious and the medic indicated it was permissible, he would go in. She was not easy company. This was not a criticism. He wasn't easy company either, which was probably why his social circle at the post consisted primarily of the secondary comm channel and a Kreth mechanic named Doval who communicated mostly in grunts and had once, over shared rations, said "you're all right for a human" in a tone that Marcus had understood was as warm as Doval got. But Saravac's difficulty had a different texture. She watched. She catalogued. She asked questions that arrived without social preamble, no lead-up, no warmth, just the question, direct in, clean, like a blade finding the exact angle it needed. On the third day she asked him what he did before the post. He told her, cargo logistics, inner compact rings, 6 years, nothing interesting. She watched him say it and, then, she said, "That's not all of it." He looked at her. "There's military bearing in how you move through the wreck," she said. Her crest, the undamaged half, was tracking him the way he'd noticed it did when she was processing something. Trained movement. Adapted for non-military context, but present. He was quiet for a moment. Then, 2 years Compact Defense Corps. Early contract. I didn't re-up. Why? There it was again. That single syllable. She'd asked him why on the docking arm and he'd given her a clean answer. This one was harder. Bureaucracy, he said, which was true enough to not be a lie and general enough to not be the whole thing. She looked at him with those solid black eyes that gave nothing away and said, "The same bureaucracy that classified my distress signal as deprioritized." "Different department," Marcus said. "Same organizational structure." She made a sound he hadn't heard from her before, low, short, the veil equivalent of a dry exhale. He spent 3 seconds deciding if it was displeasure or something else. The crest did a small, controlled movement he was beginning to learn. It was something else. On the 5th day her physical therapist, the Serati medic, whose name was Yara and who had a bedside manner that could best be described as efficient, removed the secondary splinting from her damaged forearm plating. The crack in the plating had been sealed with a regenerative compound, which worked on veil keratin composite the way it worked on bone. She was not supposed to put weight on it. She was, according to the post's medical protocol, supposed to rest. She was standing up when Marcus came in that evening. Standing in the center of the medbay floor, not holding onto anything, testing the arm's range of motion with the slow, focused attention of someone checking an instrument before a critical operation. "You're supposed to be resting," he said. "I'm assessing. Yara will do surgery on you if she sees that." Yara already saw it. She made her position clear. The arm moved through its range. She watched it. Something in the movement wasn't right, he could see it, a slight hitch at the extension point, the plating not fully cooperative yet, and she saw him see it. "It will recover." "I know it will," he said. "I'm not arguing with you." She looked at him. "You're not arguing with me. I said what I said." The crest did that thing again. He was now fairly confident what that thing was. She said, "My clan will send a ship within the next 6 days. The post commander has already been contacted. I'm being collected." He'd known this was coming. He'd known it since day one. The Veil sent people for their own. "Good," he said. "Good, yeah. My father will want to know who pulled me from the wreck." He shrugged. "Post-incident report has my name on it. Yara's report too. It's on record. He will want more than a name on a report." She was looking at him with that full cataloging attention. "He will want to see you." Marcus processed this. The warlord of the Northern Reach clan wanted to see him. That was a significant sentence. "I'm a post-logistics officer with a patched suit," he said. "Yes," she said. "That is what makes it complicated." On the 7th day, the Veil ship arrived. It was nothing like the scout vessel. The scout vessel had been small, fast, built for one. This was a Veil warship of middle classification, not the largest thing in their fleet, but not designed for subtlety either. It had the silhouette of something that had won fights and expected to win more. It docked at the main arm with the calm confidence of an entity that owned whatever space it occupied. 3 Veil warriors came aboard as honor guard. They were all taller than Saravac, whiter, with fully developed warrior plating and crests that were undamaged and fully raised in formal display. They moved through the post corridor like the post was a place they were allowing to exist. The post's non-human staff, experienced, generally unflappable, got out of the way. The human staff, less experienced, more curious, gathered at corridor junctions and stared. The honor guard stopped at the medbay. Saravac met them there, and there was a brief exchange in Veil military dialect that the post's translator system rendered as partly classified, which was a thing Marcus hadn't known translator systems could do until right now. The senior warrior, the one with the most extensive crest display, looked at Marcus, who was standing slightly to the side of the medbay entrance because Yara had told him firmly that he was not going to be in the room for the transfer and he was respecting that while simultaneously being in the general area. The senior warrior said something. The post translator rendered it as, "This is the human." Not a question. Saravac said something back. The translator caught only part of it, acted without calculation. The senior warrior looked at Marcus for a long moment. Then, he made a gesture, right arm, slight outward angle, crest held level, and Marcus had no translator note for it, but it felt like something. An acknowledgement. Recognition from a distance, offered briefly, meaning something that he didn't have the cultural vocabulary to fully receive. Marcus nodded back, because it was all he had. At the boarding ramp, before she walked up it, Saravac stopped. She turned. He was at the base of the ramp. He'd ended up there without quite deciding to, the way you end up somewhere without tracking the steps that got you there. She looked at him from the top of the ramp. The repaired crest. The sealed arm. The expression on a Veil face that he had spent 9 days slowly learning to read and was only beginning to get a handle on. "The galaxy will hear your name," she said. "I'm a post-logistics officer," he said. "Yes." She held his gaze. "That part will confuse them." Then, she walked up the ramp and the ship took her. Marcus stood at the base of the empty ramp for a moment. Then, he went back to his station. Filed 2 cargo declarations. Argued with the requisition system about his suit for the 4th time. Got the same answer. Ate his lunch. At the Compact Council's Inner Ring headquarters, a report landed on the desk of Counselor Faya, a senior administrative delegate with 30 years of galactic diplomacy behind her and a talent for reading what reports meant rather than what they said. The report was an incident summary from Outer Relay Post 7. Emergency response. Singular responder. Subject: Vale military personnel. She read it twice. Then, she cross-referenced the emergency dispatch archive, which showed 17 species receiving the distress signal and logging 0 responses. She sat with that. Then, she pulled the responders file. Marcus. Human. Former Defense Corps. Current post logistics. Unremarkable service record. No commendations, no disciplinary events beyond the formal reprimand that had been filed the day after the incident, which she read and which told her more about the post commander than it did about Marcus. She flagged the file. Not for action. Not yet. Just to know where it was. 3 days later, a veiled diplomatic communication arrived at the council offices. Formal. Sealed. The kind that came through official channels when the Northern Reach clan wanted something recognized rather than ignored. It was brief. Veil communications tended toward economy, and, it said, in the measured language of interspecies protocol, that the warlord of the Northern Reach extended formal recognition of a debt of life to the human stationed at Outer Relay Post 7. Debt of life. Counselor Faya had been in galactic diplomacy for 30 years. She had seen debt of life declarations 3 times. Once between 2 Vale clans, which had restructured a territorial border that had been contested for 80 years. Once between a Vale clan and a Serati trade house, which had produced an alliance that still held 20 years later. Once between a Vale clan and a Marin political faction, which had ended the faction. She looked at the name on the declaration. A human. At an outer relay post. In a patched suit. She pulled the 17 species no response log from the archive. She set it beside the debt of life declaration. She looked at both documents for a long time. Then, she called her assistant and said, "I need a briefing on current human representation in compact emergency response protocols." Her assistant was young enough to ask why. "Because," she said carefully, "I think something just changed, and I want to understand what changed before everyone else starts arguing about it." At Outer Relay Post 7, on the secondary comm channel, a new transmission was coming in. A minor complaint. A cargo dispute. Nothing interesting. Marcus had his coffee. He listened. He was very good at listening to things nobody else thought mattered. At the Northern Reach clan's primary fortress, Saravac stood before her father and delivered her report with the flat, precise delivery of a warrior who did not embellish. She covered the ambush, the ship damage, the wreck, the 17 signals sent and 17 responses absent. Then, she covered the one response that had come. Her father listened without interrupting, which was not standard. He was a large man, large even by Vale warrior standard, with a crest that had taken on the slight silver tinting that came with age and rank, and eyes that had seen enough of the galaxy to have stopped being surprised by it. When she finished, he was quiet. Then, he said, "A human." "Yes." "Alone." "Yes." "No calculation." Saravac looked at her father and thought about a man sitting cross-legged on a metal floor with someone else's nutrient pack, telling her it was enough of a reason. "No calculation," she confirmed. Her father turned to the wall of the fortress hall, stone bold, carrying the clan's lineage marks along its full height in the precise, deep cuts that Vale stonemasons made to last longer than the people they recorded. He looked at it for a moment. "The debt is real," he said. "Yes." "And the human understands what it means?" She thought about that. About solid black eyes meeting brown ones. About the absence of calculation. About the way he'd said "where I come from" as if he meant something specific by it. "No," she said honestly. "Not yet." Her father nodded slowly. "Then, he will need to be taught." It was not a gentle sentence. Veil debts of life were not gentle things. They pulled. They changed the shape of everything around them. They were binding in the way that gravity is binding, not because anyone agreed to it, but because that was simply how things worked when a Veil clan named you into their lineage of obligation. Marcus had walked into a burning wreck for a stranger. The stranger's father had just enrolled him in something much larger than a rescue. He was still at his station on the secondary comm channel, listening to a miner complain about cargo weight limits, completely unaware. That was fine. He would find out. The transfer orders arrived on a Tuesday, which was not a special day in the galactic calendar but would feel like one in retrospect. Marcus read them twice. Then, he sat still for a moment in the way he had when he was deciding whether something was real. The orders were real. Signed at the council level, which was not the level that issued transfer orders to outer relay post logistics officers. Transfer orders for someone like Marcus came from post commanders, from regional logistics directors, from the bureaucratic middle layers of the compact administrative structure that hummed along moving cargo and personnel without anybody at the top paying attention. Council-level transfers happened when somebody at the top was paying attention. He was reassigned to Compact Council headquarters. Inner Ring. Role, Interspecies Emergency Response Liaison, a position title he had to read 3 times because it did not exist in any directory he could find, which meant somebody had created it specifically, which meant this was not an accident. His post commander gave him the news with the expression of a man who had been told to deliver information he didn't fully understand and had chosen not to ask too many questions. "You leave in 4 days," the commander said. "Congratulations, I think." Doval, who was not a demonstrative being and had once described his emotional range as functional, gave Marcus his grunt of approval and then handed him a small piece of Kreth-worked metal, a charm of safe travel, which was either deeply sentimental or deeply practical depending on how you understood Kreth culture, and Marcus had always thought it was probably both. He put it in his jacket pocket. He arrived at the Inner Ring on a transport that took 3 days and involved one layover at a mid-ring station where a Serati news aggregator was running a story that mentioned Outer Relay Post 7. He caught it on a screen above a food vendor and stopped eating to read it. It was not a long story. It was the kind of story that sits between larger stories, easy to miss. But it mentioned the 17 species no response log, which someone had apparently decided to stop ignoring, and it mentioned a Compact Council review of emergency response protocol gaps, and, at the very end, almost as an aside, it mentioned a human logistics officer whose name had been cited in a Northern Reach Clan Dead of Life declaration. His name. He bought a second coffee and thought about that for the rest of the layover. The council headquarters occupied 3 connected stations in the Inner Ring, large enough that they had their own transport systems running between them, and old enough that the architecture had accumulated the signatures of every species that had ever been powerful enough to add to it. Veil stonework beside Serati glass panels beside human-era modular construction in the newest sections, a physical record of who had been at the table and when. Marcus arrived at the human-era section, which was newer than everything around it, and reported to his assigned office, which was small and clean and had a window facing the station's main transit hub. There was a person waiting in the office. Counselor Faya was smaller than he'd expected. He hadn't expected anything specifically, since he hadn't known she existed until she introduced herself, but there was something about the size and directness of her that recalibrated whatever ambient expectation he'd carried into the room. She was perhaps 60, Serati human mixed heritage, with the 3 eyes of Serati lineage and the posture of someone who had been told no a great many times and had developed a productive relationship with the word. "Sit down," she said. Not unkindly. Just efficiently. He sat. She looked at him for a moment. Then, she said, "Do you understand what a veiled debt of life means in compact diplomatic terms?" "I've been doing some reading," he said. "Summarize." "It's binding. Intergenerational. The clan that holds it is obligated to honor the life of whoever it's owed to, and the person it's owed to gains access to Veil clan resources and standing that can't be revoked without a formal dissolution process that requires council witnesses and that basically never happens." Accurate enough. She leaned back slightly. "And, do you understand what it means that a human, specifically, a human, for the first time in the Compact's recorded diplomatic history, holds one?" He thought about that. I'm beginning to. Warlord Davenvac has formally requested that you be made available to liaise between human interests and Vale clan interests at the council level. He has also provided, through appropriate channels, documentation that the 17 species who did not respond to his daughter's distress signal were given multiple opportunities to respond and chose not to, and he has requested a formal review of whether those species' emergency response obligations under Compact Treaty are being fulfilled. Marcus was quiet. He is not asking for consequences, Faya continued. He is asking for a review. Which is a very specific thing in compact diplomacy. It is the thing you ask for when you want everyone to understand that you know exactly what happened and you are choosing, for now, to address it through process rather than through the other available methods. The other available methods being Vale warrior clans doing what Vale warrior clans do. Yes. Marcus looked at the window. The transit hub outside was busy: ships, cargo loaders, species he could name and species he couldn't, the constant motion of the compact's inner machinery going about itself. And the position. Emergency Response Liaison. That's not a title that exists. It does now. Whose idea? Faya looked at him with all three eyes in the particular way that suggested she was deciding exactly how much to say. The warlord suggested that whoever held his debt would benefit from a position with actual access. I agreed that such a position had been notably absent. She paused. There are 17 species currently very interested in being cooperative with Compact Council review processes. Some of that interest has found its way into support for staffing that previously could not have been funded. Guilt money, Marcus thought, from 17 species that had looked at a distress signal and done nothing. It was not the most dignified origin for a position, but he had spent years in systems that ran on undignified origins and he was not going to be precious about it. What does the job actually involve? He said. Ensuring that what happened to Saravac does not happen again. To anyone. Regardless of species. He looked at her. I know that sounds like a very large promise, she said, to put on one person with a patched suit. I got a new suit, he said. The corner of her mouth moved. I saw that in your file. Congratulations. The requisition finally went through. She gave him 3 days to settle in before the first actual work arrived, and the work arrived all at once and from all directions, because the story had fully cleared its mutation cycle through the information networks of the inner ring, and what had been a strange anecdote at an outer relay post was now, depending on which network you consumed, either a human interest story about an unlikely hero or a political flashpoint about compact emergency response failures or a diplomatic curiosity. About Vale dead-of-life precedents or all three simultaneously. Marcus ignored the coverage. He read the files. All of them. 17 species emergency response logs for the past 5 years, which were dense and exhaustive and told a very clear story if you were the kind of person who knew how to listen to things nobody thought mattered. The pattern was not complicated. Species responded to distress calls from other species they had beneficial relationships with. They deprioritized that word again, that comfortable, clinical word, calls from species they had complicated histories with, or species they assessed as lower priority trade partners, or species that existed in sectors they'd rather not be responsible for. The system had no enforcement mechanism for deprioritization decisions. The treaty language was old enough that it had been written before most of the current interspecies dynamics existed, and it had not been updated, because updating it required consensus, and consensus required everyone to agree that the current system had a problem, and nobody who benefited from the current system wanted to have that conversation. Until now. When a human sitting on a metal floor with a nutrient pack had made the conversation unavoidable. On the 12th day of his new position, a communication came through on his personal channel. Not the official one. The personal one. It was brief. Audio only, voice translation carrying the clean, clipped precision of Vale military dialect into standard. The arm is functional, Saravac said. I thought you should know. He was in the middle of a document review. He stopped. Good, he said. I'm glad. A pause. You are at the council. Yes. My father made things complicated for you. Your father, Marcus said carefully, gave me a position that lets me fix something that was already broken before you crashed. So, net positive, I think. Another pause. Longer. He waited through it the way he'd learned to wait. The galaxy doesn't know what to do with you, she said. It doesn't have to know yet, he said. No, she said. Then, the Marin Syndicate. The ones who shot my ship. I've been reading about them. They have a facility in the outer Taven sector. Compact jurisdiction is technically contested there. Nobody has moved on it because nobody wants to be responsible for the jurisdiction question. Marcus pulled up the Taven sector file, which he'd flagged 2 days ago. 17 species received a distress call, she said, and filed it under deprioritized. I was the target. The people who made me the target are still operational. I know. I am not asking you to handle it alone, she said. That was a one-time situation. Was it? He said. A pause. Then, something he recognized now, the dry veil exhale, the specific sound she made when something surprised her into honesty. No, she said. I don't think it was. She ended the transmission. He looked at the Taven sector file for a moment. Then, he flagged it for formal review, attached a jurisdictional analysis he'd started 2 days ago and finished tonight, and forwarded it to Counselor Faya's office with a note that read, "This one is solvable if we address the jurisdiction ambiguity first. I have a draft framework. Do you have time tomorrow?" Faya replied in 4 minutes, which told him she'd been awake and working and probably had the file open already. Yes. Bring the draft. At the Northern Reach clan's fortress, in the great hall where the lineage marks ran floor to ceiling on old stone, Warlord Davenvac received a report from his intelligence network about the new council position, the 17 species compliance review, the Taven sector file movement, and the name attached to all of it. He read it. Then, he looked at the lineage marks on the wall. The cuts that went back generations. The names of warriors who had done things that changed the shape of the world they lived in, recorded in stone so the weight of what they'd done wouldn't be lost. He had added one name to the active records of his clan. A human name. A thing that had never been done before. He had done it because a debt was real and because reality was not something the Northern Reach clan had ever found it useful to deny, no matter how inconvenient reality chose to be. He had also done it because he had read the incident report. The timeline. The 17 empty dispatch logs. The one cracked suit and one nutrient pack and one person who had not done a calculation before going in. The galaxy was full of calculation. Calculation was necessary and smart and the thing that kept your people alive across centuries. But there were moments, rare, specific, arriving without announcement, when the person who did not calculate was the most dangerous thing in the room. Not because they were reckless. Because they had decided that some things were worth more than the math. His daughter had come home because of one of those moments. He was a patient man. He had led his clan through 3 territorial conflicts and 2 compact political crises and 1 event that the records classified as a misunderstanding and that everyone who had been present would describe differently. He knew how to wait for things to develop. He was curious to see what this one became. At the council headquarters, Marcus closed the Taven file and opened the next one. Emergency response gap documentation from the mid-ring sectors. Dense. Detailed. Full of the kind of information that systems produced when they were working exactly as designed and producing exactly the wrong outcomes. He read it. He was good at this. Had always been good at it. Listening to the things nobody thought mattered, reading the patterns in the noise, sitting with the secondary channel until the signal came through. The galaxy had spent years sorting humans into the category of soft. Biologically fragile. A curiosity. Easy to ignore. It had put them at the outer relay posts with the boring assignments and the deprioritized distress calls and the positions that didn't exist until someone inconvenient needed them filled. It had not, apparently, considered what would happen when one of them paid attention. Or what it meant that paying attention, genuinely, stubbornly, without calculation, was the thing they were best at. Marcus had a new suit. He had a job that hadn't existed 3 weeks ago. He had a veiled debt of life he was still learning the full weight of, and a counselor who knew how to turn inconvenient truths into structural change, and a Kreth charm in his jacket pocket, and a file full of 17 species who were currently very motivated to be cooperative. He had work to do. He did it. And, somewhere in the great, humming machinery of the galaxy, in the places where decisions got made that shaped how species treated each other across the reach of known space, something shifted, the way things shift when a small fact turns out to be load-bearing, and, someone finally, thought to look at what was built on top of it. The galaxy had looked at humans and called them soft. It had not been wrong, exactly. It had just missed the part where soft things, under enough pressure, do not break. They find a way through.